Is the emphasis on relying on reasoning. So for our case also, just as the saying says that it has to be driven through inferences, but inferences ultimately rooted in perception. That's because of course that would be the case with the extremely hidden phenomena, and so is the case with the slightly hidden also, that their understanding have to be reliable understanding have to be driven through reasoning, through rationalization, which would then ultimately be rooted on a perception. So that's how it all boils down to the to the empirical perception, empirical finding. So that we see that our reasonings, the strength of the reasoning has to be ultimately rooted in perception, the empirical perception. With regard to the field of empirical perception, here the scientists are far ahead in their methods of investigation, in their findings, in their searches, in their involvement, etc. So that's how, in terms of topics like dealing with the working of special mental states, etc., they have to be rooted in perception, in the sense of what we ourselves experience. So here we see two different types of what might constitute the perceptual field. One that is perceptually seen through the sense faculties, and another one which is perceptually experienced from within. So far the scientific investigation has, of course, been rooted or grounded or has started their starting point on the perception, but more on the perceptual fields of the sense faculties, not so much on the perceptual experience of the inner consciousness. And that is understandable because that is much more difficult to pursue from there. So that's how, so far, the scientific field of investigation has mainly been confined in this world of the outer world, though rooted in the perception and the perceptual fields through the faculties. But then, over the course of a year, now things are beginning to change in that their attention is being driven more inward into the empirical perception of the experiences, inner experience of individual, since that has much greater connection with the actual experiences. So in this regard, it may be just a case of where we have emphasized more or not, or where each of the traditions emphasize more or not. But I don't see a contradiction there. There's not a head-on collision there in any way. Even in terms of the method, in terms of the pursuit, I don't see any contradiction. I particularly remember very clearly when I personally have been advised, have been talked out of such a conversation, or pursuing such a conversation by others, although with sincerity. But I have always been primarily driven by the teaching, by the insight in Buddhism that one has to base one's understanding, experience through investigation. So here, whatever investigation you undertake, it has to be geared towards searching the truth. That will have the effect of dispelling one's distortion of the reality, be that in the sense of underestimation or in the sense of overestimation. And in terms of the field of investigation, the Buddhists come up with three major fields of investigation, fields of phenomena: the evident one, the slightly hidden, and the extremely hidden, whereas the scientists so far have mainly been involved with the evident empirical world, leaving out the less evident and the extremely evident ones. But then in this field, the way the scientists have advanced is really impressive. In that, say, in the case of the empirical things, in terms of their being ephemeral and changing and whatnot. The scientists, the connection with the scientists, involved with them, getting to involved with them has really helped me in my understanding of the subtle impermanent nature of things, in that through the use of tools in these instruments I have been able to observe the constant influx of things more clearly and more directly. And likewise, so goes the same with the concept of non-self. We have always been pursuing, pressing that yes, there is no intrinsically or intrinsically independent self out there that could be that could be approached. That could be the light has just gone. Is it still working? Yeah. So even in the case of the concept of non-self, with my involvement with the scientists through their findings in the field of the working of brain, I have really benefited from this, and my understanding on Buddhism has really increased. The only casualty you might call is the belief in Mount Meru. That may be the only casualty, but in terms of other realms of understanding, I have been really appreciative of this involvement that has really benefited me personally, and likewise the rest of our community could look forward to this. And as we have heard, even from the scientific community, they have acknowledged that they have also benefited from this. So this kind of a convergence, a dialogue has really benefited mutually. So that's the reason why I, from my own experience, from how I personally gained from this, I have been pressing that this could be broadened and institutionalized so that the entire community could get benefit out of that. And in this regard, we have pursued initially with giving scientific teaching, scientific instructions to select a few monastics from different monasteries and whatnot. We have pursued that for the last 4 or 5 years. But now has come a time where we are making the plunge in making it more broad-based. And now very soon we are coming to the time when officially the courses in science would be incorporated into the monastic curriculum. And because of this upcoming eminent eminent change, I have proposed that this Mind and Life teaching, Mind and Life conference be convened at a monastic setting. The benefit from that is that just as we have heard from the scientific community, they said that just from the past 2 days of the observation, they have been really impressed with what they have seen, and also they had the opportunity to witness the debate, the major debate congregation happening in Uganda, and I personally wish I could come there, but somehow from the persistent teachings that I've been giving of the past many weeks and months, I still don't feel quite well in my throat, so I still feel some hoarse or whatnot. So that's the reason why I could not make there. And I gathered from the scientists that apparently you had discussed the conception of self, as the focus of debate last night, which they observed, and as we saw them bring this up in their observation. Now, in this regard, one thing very Yeah, one thing interesting about the conception of self is that irrespective of whether a particular religion come up so pronounced and so refined in terms of what it is constituted of, how to address that or whatnot, because either directly or indirectly they do seem to address this conception of self-centeredness, of this conception of holding on to an absolute concept of oneself. But one thing special about Buddhism is that it has a very pronounced, a very refined understanding of what constitutes this conception of self, what are its implications, how are the ways of addressing it, and how that would have the impact of advancing one's welfare. So this is the particular, the specific about Buddhism. In the case of the monastic community here, people have been pursuing their studies years after year, and some have been very, very successful in this. But one thing that I want to remind them is that the way that we have come to preserve the tradition of Nalanda is through the combination of study, reflection, and meditation, and that's the main way how we have preserved it. And I hope that through your through your observation, I hope that this will become more evident. Like at the same time, I also hope that through these deliberations, by witnessing this dialogue, I very much hope that the monks would come out with the impression that the scientists too are involved with very profound topics in their observation, in their investigation, and would have some sense of what might have been going on in the past many years in Dharamsala, in terms of the dialogues. So that's the reason why I have proposed for this meeting to be held here.
However, all the scientists with their full dedications, with the interest, they have come here from far away. And this meeting with great scientists and how it develops, what is the reason behind. And in another sense, I remember very vividly in the year 1955, when I went from Beijing, Mo Zedong. I met Mo Zedong often, many times. And the last date on which I met him, he told me that the way you think, it's like a scientist. You think like a scientist. And then after that, in the year 1960s, in Tibet, there's so many letters which are released from Tibet. And they believe that is blind faith. All the the religion, the Buddhism is a blind faith. And then Mozart also said, like the letter came out from Tibet saying that they believe the Buddhist philosophy is nothing but a blind faith. So the Tibetans, Buddhism, Tibetan needs to overcome that. Now that the scientists rail, I'm not talking about the way the Buddhists, it's a very different, the way the Buddhists learn, the way the monks learn the Buddhist philosophy, it's purely, it's like a scientific method. Now they are the real scientists, because what he meant to say is like the way the monks study, the methodology of how the pedagogy of what the monks study is purely like a scientific method.
Made speechless.
And then as the science advances, that the many people in the world, the long time back, the scholars, they used to say, the Tibetan Buddhist scholars, they used to say that if you study, if you become scholars of the science, if you're good in science, that means you won't be able to, in fact, those people who said, who are good in science will not be able to understand the Buddhist philosophy. Now they have been made tongue-tied. Earlier they used to believe that those people who study science, the monks who study science, will not be able to explain, especially during the debating and all, dialectic, they won't be able to get a win over the opponents. And many say that, as the science develops, then Buddhism will decline. And one of the reasons, the first time when I met with the scientists, I had two objectives. I have two. I always said I have two objectives. My first objective is the knowledge, to expand our knowledge. There's no judgment, which one is good or which one is bad. It's non-judgmental. For example, in the Buddhist philosophy, when you want to study it, when it comes to the practice, when you want to study the subjective knowledge, there's no question of, you have to find the reality. You have to find the reality, the objective. There's no question of judgmental. You have to really study, without any bias. So the first reason, the first objective why I learn science is our knowledge. Till now, the scientists have really, objectively, they have studied in depth. Now they are studying deeply. And then not only that, they are also studying the human emotions and the different emotions and how it's been functional, how it is related to the object, the relationship between the subjective and the objective. And the second aim why I've interacted with the scientist is because when you study the objectives and the chemicals, after studying and learning, then what is the beneficial aspects of all these science we will try to get. For example, in medicine, where they have studied the human body, and later on they found out the benefits of all this medical research, and then they expand the knowledge, and then those which are harmful, they reduce it, and they try to block it, they try to stop it, and because of that, because of the chemical analysis, chemical reaction, and this is the second. And the second one there, you have to have a judgment, you have to decide which one is better, which is good. Like that, when you think about the consciousness and the emotions, when you go deep, when you start understanding what is, we are not talking about the life after death, we are not talking about the nirvana, we are not talking about whether you are up there to, the God, realm of God, in this life, in this world, we want this world, in this whole world, to have a better world, more peaceful world, and a happier world. And when you start understanding the emotions and the consciousness and what is the root cause of what makes the happiness, what is the main root cause of is a root cause of suffering, and that we have to know, and then we should have the antidote for that, and try to the causes, we try to reduce it, resist it, and then we to try to find out, subdue all those negative emotions, afflictive emotions, and then try to find the better. I have many friends, they have highly expert and highly known, but the scientists who are brain neuroscientists, they are expert scholars, but they himself, but personally, it's a very unhappy and had lots of worries. That's why. So I have the scientists, I have met many scientists who are well known, the emotions. When they start understanding the broad mind, they have to, it is really helpful for the individual scientists when they start understanding the different aspects of emotions, then it helps the scientists themselves personally to become a better person and more peaceful person. So it's a big problem if the scientist who has a problem, emotional problem, if they work in the laboratory, the result will not be good. A scientist who is well at ease, who's at peace, and who's composed, when they work with scientific research, I think it'll be a greater research. Research will be more productive. Now this is, you have to be careful. For example, when I say that the importance of the science doesn't mean that it's more than 50% of your commitment towards the science only. You have to also have both. It has to be balanced. So for example, I have lots of interest in science. When I was even in Tibet, even my tutors, I told him then, I used to tell him that, okay, even my tutors, when the senior tutors used to tell me when young, I used to tell them that I'm interested in science, and even they told me, oh, that makes sense. So for example, when I say that I try to meditate on emptiness and compassion, whenever I get a free leisure hours, I used to, my main purpose and the focus is on the meditation, on the compassions, and all. And then maybe some, there's a say those who are, who gets interested in science, who engage in science, and sometimes then neglect the meditations and the Buddhist philosophy. The core, the essence is, it's like a root is supposed, understanding contemplative studies and the Buddhist philosophy. On top of that, then you study the science. Say, for example, I have no science knowledge. I have no basic knowledge on the science, but still after discussing with the scientist and interactive session with the scientist, then through discussions, then I get some, confidence. And then I started studying about this dialectics and then about the middle way. And then it really helps me personally, and then I think it's very important for the monks also. You should consider, while studying science, also do not neglect studying the Buddhist philosophy.
Your Holiness, I'd like to introduce or remind you of Diana Chapman Walsh, researcher originally at Harvard University, past president of Wellesley College and a major American university, and she will be our facilitator for the day. So I'll give the chair over to her. Have the microphone on for Diana Chapman Walsh.
Hello, yes. There we go. Takes a minute. Thank you so very much. Thanks to each of you for your eloquent and inspiring opening comments, really beautiful opening statements that have positioned us for these 6 days together. It's truly a historic moment. I think we all feel that very keenly, a high-intensity moment as we're leaning into our microphones, listening so very carefully to your words. We are just thrilled to be a part of this moment, including we new materialists. I have a new role for myself. I'm a new materialist. The new materialist with our minds opened by science and our minds calmed by contemplative practice. So we come to you having heard these stories this morning of the great personal benefit over these 25 years that have come from these encounters of these two remarkable intellectual traditions. The personal benefits, but also the much closer alignment of our work, those of us who have had the privilege to have these encounters with the Buddhist traditions, with Your Holiness, the closer alignment of our work with real and urgent needs in the world. So it has both of those extraordinary benefits to all the participants, and it's an enormous privilege to be part of it. So my task this morning, I will try to be brief, is just to give you a little sense of the shape and the structure of our program, the intentions that are embedded in the decisions that were made about how we would spend this time together. Everyone who is here has made a serious commitment, a significant commitment of time, and yet it is very brief to cover all of the questions that we hope to at least begin to explore and unearth together. So we've thought carefully about how we can spend our time. And again, you will find this in the program. Each morning, we will begin with a first session, and we're about now to launch into our first session this morning, now that we have had our welcomes and our orientation. Each morning, we will have a first session in the style and the spirit of the Mind and Life Institute dialogues over this quarter century. So, as His Holiness said, he has been off speaking to these scientists, and maybe some of his colleagues in the monasteries are wondering, what has he been up to? So this is an opportunity for all of you to observe firsthand a little bit of the richness of those encounters between His Holiness and other members of the monastic tradition and the scientists from the Western tradition. And we'll do that in just a moment. So every day we'll have the little bit of that as an example, an exemplar. Then every day, the second morning session will be different from that in its intention. It will be more explicitly educational. It will be, in a sense, inaugurating this new era of science education for Tibetan monastics. So we will be celebrating this new era, in a sense, with really exquisite presentations from experts who will bring the distilled essence of their thinking. There won't be time for them to elaborate or explicate in very much detail, but they will try to bring you little gems of what they have learned from their years and years of deep scientific study, and to really give a kind of ignite everyone's interest and curiosity about that. It will not obviously be the equivalent of many years of study, but we hope it will have that inspirational quality. And we have a very distinguished faculty. Again, you can read about them in your program. And then each day, the third session will be what we're calling an open discussion. It will be an opportunity for questions to come from the floor, both in this hall, and also we have created a method for questions to come from the remote locations. And they can be posed to any of the speakers who have been present that morning. And so I encourage everyone, if you have a question that you would like to pose to His Holiness or to any of the speakers on a given day, think about how to formulate it, and there will be a full hour for that give and take with the audience. And then the fourth session every day after dinner will again be educational in its design and its purpose. So we will have speakers who will again bring a topic and explore it carefully and in a way that those who are not as familiar with it will, we hope, be able to follow and think about its implications. Of course, we hope that everything we do here will be educational in some fundamental sense, educational for all of us, and that, of course, is the great opportunity that we have before us. So the arc of the week in terms of its conceptual organization begins this morning with a more general introductory session, and then the next days we delve more and more deeply into specific topic areas, so physics, neuroscience, and so on. And again, that's well described in the program.
I'll begin, Your Holiness, and I'll begin first by reminding you that you asked for the content of this Mind and Life event, that there would be 3 topics. The topics would be modern physics, in particular quantum mechanics, and we'll also weave in some relativity theory. The second topic was neuroscience, which Richie Davidson, Tanya Singer, and others will speak to. And the third topic is consciousness research, which Christoph Koch, Mathieu Ricard, and Michel Bitbo will speak to as well. So this is our scientific program. And we can only, of course, begin what is a huge and challenging field of study, but I hope that the monastics here will get a flavor for these 3 remarkable fields of modern research, which you have found so interesting. We'll also be speaking at the very end about applications, particularly applications of mindfulness in the areas of clinical work and in education. so that one can see that the fruits of this, what seems to be very abstract, perhaps, study between Buddhist thought and science actually has already shown to have great fruits in the world. I'd like to begin by showing a picture of a very young scientist. This is probably from about 1945, 43, something in there, who made a discovery. Do you recognize the scientist? You tell the story in one of your books of how you looked for the rabbit in the moon. We look for the man in the moon, but you began by looking. This is a very important lesson, that we need to begin by looking. But you not only looked, you began to think about what you saw. You began to apply reason. These two, to look and to reason, are the foundations for science, the foundations for knowledge. And when you looked and reasoned, you saw something that perhaps no other Tibetan had ever seen. You saw that there was a light source, namely the sun, casting a shadow from the mountains on the moon, and you inferred, in the way that you would be then schooled in later, you inferred that there was an external source of light illuminating the moon, casting shadows in this remarkable, beautiful way that you saw as the rabbit in the moon. Not just you, but of course your whole culture. You know, some years earlier in Italy, there was a similar such observation which took place. This is Galileo Galilei, and in 1609, with a telescope which he made himself, you had the 13th Dalai Lama's telescope, I think, so you didn't have to make one. Galileo had to make one because the telescope had only just been invented. And so he put together his telescope and did exactly what you did. He looked, and over 3 weeks, he drew a picture of what he saw were the phases of the moon, the shadows that were cast, and just as you did, he inferred that the moon was moving about the earth, illuminated by the sun, and that there were, in fact, mountains on the moon. Prior to this, people thought that the moon did not have mountains, but he discovered them, you could say, by his seeing and his reasoning. He also looked at other objects in the sky, Jupiter and its moons. He really was one of the most significant and perhaps profoundest of our scientists who changed the entire history of Western scientific investigation. Now, in 1633, so some years later, the Church, the Catholic Church, put him on trial for heresy because, because what he saw and what he reasoned was contrary to religious belief. He refused to really recant. He refused to deny his inferences, and he stayed with what he saw was the truth. They threatened him with torture, with death, and finally they put him into prison. Through the intervention of a friend, they made him stay in his house, and so the last 9 years of his life, for these truths, he was confined to his own small house. I see you haven't been confined to your small house. You haven't been tried for heresy, but...
Fortunately. Sick by name.
Because of the Dalai Lama's name.
The Dalai Lama's name gives you a certain privilege, yes. But I hope that many, many other monks and nuns will look through the telescopes and will also reason about what they saw. I tell these two stories not only because they're so similar. I can see by the way you're looking at the microphone that you have great interest in electronics.
Like if you have not heard, then I'm going to explain. I remember most probably in the year 1958, most probably 58 or 57, the previous Dalai Lamas, there's a huge telescope, and I used to go out during the daytime, especially when I was on the roof of the Potala. Then I used to view through the telescope, and there's nothing else to view. And when in Nubalinga, there's a place called Namdegong, on the moon. I used to view the moon and the stars. Moons and stars. I used to go up on Nubaling. As explained. I don't, like at that time, I don't, believe that there's a moon. I mean, like, wrap it up on the moon. But when I view through the telescope to the moon, the mountains, the dried lake, and then from the side, the mountain ranges. And during the night, when I viewed, when sun sets, and the reflection of the sun rays falls, and then the directions of the shadows towards the east, sees the changes in the shadows there on the moon. Then he infers, he concluded that it's all because of the reflection of the sun rays up there. Oh, thank you. One evening it was bright. And then the tutor got confirmed, believe it. He agreed what I said. And then it's another just now you have explained about it comparatively to the Galileos, and now I've realized
putting house arrest.
Of preliminary practices which involve making mandala offerings, offering the whole universe, and the conception of the universe is based on Abhidhamma with the Mount Meru in the middle. So when the Dalai Lama says there is no such thing as Mount Meru, some people might be thinking, what is his business? Talking. We're doing this practice, and he's saying that Mount Meru doesn't exist.
Quite sufficient sort of reasons to give punishment. Okay, sorry.
Thank you. I tell this story because the relationship between science and religion is perhaps one of the most important relationships in civilization. Alfred North Whitehead was one of America's and England's most important philosophers. And in 1925, so, nearly a century ago, he said this about the relationship between the two of these. He said, when we consider what religion is for mankind, how important it has been, how religion has been so important, and what science is also profoundly important, it is no exaggeration to say that the future course of history depends upon the decision of this generation as to the relations between them. The course of history will be determined by whether we come to a right relationship or a wrong relationship between religion and science. And I think, Your Holiness, that this is one of the great public services, a kind of task that you have done, a kind of achievement, that through your person you have convened scientists with contemplative scholars and practitioners, that religion and science have come together on a common ground in a way that has not led to prison, but has led to enlightenment in some small way. I think this cannot be exaggerated in its importance. This is perhaps not fully evident here in this monastic community, but your work in the West, in Europe, the United States in particular, has given an entirely different picture of how religion and science can come together as friends. We need not be enemies. We need not fight with one another, much less put each other in prison. And this quote, which Diana Chapman Walsh read in part, for me brings these two together in exactly the right way, where one says, not so long ago, think of Galileo, many people viewed science's objective knowledge and the subjective understanding of Buddhist inner science as mutually exclusive. But a combination of these two can provide the complete conditions for attaining real human happiness. As a consequence, Mind and Life has taken up this really exciting and profoundly important task of bringing these two worlds together in a way that does provide positive progress towards human flourishing. It has done so by publications of the dialogues which we've had together, so that they do not remain only among a small number. And in 2003, you'll remember, Your Holiness, that we had an important meeting at MIT, the first public meeting at which some of the research that Richie was describing was presented. The interest that came from that meeting, especially by young people, young scientists, was enormous. As a consequence, we started the Summer Research Institute, primarily for young scholars, scientists, and it's an integrated program of research topics and meditation, East and West, contemplative and scientific. We also started Young Investigators Awards, the Francisco Varela Awards. You remember not long ago we were together in Rochester and you had an opportunity to meet 6 of these remarkable young scientists. And so these are the fruits of that work we've done together, fruits that have been cared for by the Board of Trustees of the Mind and Life Institute, with whom you periodically meet and give counsel on what it is we undertake. I'd like to stop here by way of introduction and by way also of kind of a gratitude, a deep gratitude for your leadership, not only of this monastic community, but your leadership on a world issue, a problem which really confronts the entire globe going forward. I know you do this in modesty and you do this with great humor and joy, but you should know that we understand its significance.